Well, good evening and welcome to the Town of Corte Madera Planning Commission for Tuesday, October 10th, 2023. Please take a roll call.
All right, Commissioner Kenny?
Here.
Commissioner Bendel?
Here.
Vice Chair Rizzo?
Here.
And Chair Chase?
Here.
And then Commissioner Boischer is absent.
Thank you. Yes. All right, salute the flag with me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Tracy, do you have anyone online that wants to make a public comment on anything that is not on tonight's agenda?
All right. No, Chair Chase.
All right, then we will not have anyone contributing to public comment tonight. So we will go straight to our business item. So tonight we have continuation of review and discussion of potential amendments to Corte Madera zoning ordinance regulations related to design review. This is a delightful topic that I believe Mr. Boyle and Tracy are going to introduce.
Yes, we are. Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes, we are. Good evening, Chair Chase and members of the Planning Commission and members of the public online, if there's anyone out there. This is a continuation of the workshop that Tracy and I have led several. We've had 3 public workshops, and then we also had a special meeting just with the Christmas Tree Hill neighborhood. And hopefully this will be our final workshop, our final subject to tackle and get your feedback. And then after that, I'm jumping ahead to next steps already. After that, we will bring you a revised zoning ordinance and a zoning ordinance amendment, which will show all these changes that we've talked about in the last numerous workshops. So this one is, so just a general, the purpose of this meeting and the purpose of the exercise we've been going through is that staff is seeking commission feedback and direction. And the discussion is centering on, overall, the discussions have centered on design review policy, clarification of existing regulations, and any changes to the structure of the code that we can make to make it more usable and clearer and better for all of us, both commission, staff, and the public. There will be no formal action taken at the end of this workshop, just like the previous ones. We will come back with all of your recommendations, like I said, in a subsequent meeting. Overview of design review. Design review is the basic process for a discretionary process that helps control the visual and physical character of the town, helps to ensure that new development and alterations to existing development meets the standards set by the zoning ordinance and for lot coverage, floor area, setbacks, and many other things. And overall gives the visual context of the town to try to keep the town looking good, as we all want it to be. Focus of this staff report will be based upon the feedback we've received from the commission and the public during I say the 4 workshops, but it's actually much more focused on, we're going to be talking about fences and retaining walls and fences on top of retaining walls. This discussion is based upon our overall discussion is based upon our many years of experience working with the design review. And again, we hope to get your feedback and on this particular aspect of modifications to yards, front yards, side yards, and rear yards in relation to fences and retaining walls. We have done a lot of research looking at other codes from other jurisdictions and found a variety of different methods to regulate retaining walls and fences. And we've included that as an attachment in the back of your staff report. Not a tremendous amount of variety in different codes. Everyone kind of has the same issues, the same problems, and have come up with very similar solutions. And then lastly, I just want to mention in the initial notice that was put out and put on the town newsletter, we talked about reviewing the design review findings. But upon further discussion, we've decided to hold off on that task and bring that back to you at a later date. So we're just going to be focusing on fences and retaining walls. I think it's handing over to Tracy.
Good evening. I'm just going to take a minute to explain our existing regulations related to fences, which we don't feel is broken, but you should be aware of generally how we regulate fences, and we do that in a few ways. Here's some plain language that state what the regulations are. And in short, really, we talk about front yard setback is limited in height to 4 feet. Side yard and rear yard can be 6 feet. And then you can go up to 8 feet with design review in the side and rear or with the neighbor's permission. And then also part of our existing code is corner lots within 50 feet of an intersection. That's also limited to 4 feet for site distance purposes. But here's a visual of what I just rattled off. Hopefully you can see the color. And I'm showing in green lines where a 6 foot high fence is allowed on a property line, or that fence can increase to 8 feet in height when the neighbors agree. Everybody agrees to the fence height, or you can obtain design review approval for a fence up to 8 feet in the side and rear. And then the yellow part shows where a 4 foot fence is permitted maximum, and you can, with design review approval in the front yard, have a fence up to 6 feet in height, except that in that blue shaded area on a corner lot, that's all limited to 4 feet. And you measure from the union of the two streets at the corner of the sidewalk back 50 feet. And that's where you have a 4 foot limit to the fence.
I was just going to chime in. The rationale for that, as you may know, is to not restrict line of sight when people are at a corner and trying to turn left or right. So you can see over a 4 foot fence, but you can't see over a 6 foot fence, generally speaking.
And one more way that fences are regulated is how you measure the height of a fence. This is different than what you're used to seeing of measuring height for a building. For a fence, you look at where is the grade higher, whether it's finished grade or natural grade, and you measure from that higher side. The graphic here kind of illustrates how you measure the height of a fence. And this can, Phil will talk about retaining walls, but this also means that if you have a retaining wall and you put a fence on top of it, you would measure from the highest finished grade, which would be at the top of the wall. And so the downslope person could have the taller combined fence and wall. And that's what we're talking to you about tonight.
Yep. So retaining walls are actually not even defined in our zoning code. The code does define walls and calls them artificial structure, constructed of many different things, used to screen things, used to enclose things, and it says to retain a building or areas of land. So it kind of encompasses retaining wall in the wall definition, but not really. A general definition out there in the world is a retaining wall. Retaining walls are relatively rigid structures used for supporting soil laterally, so it can be retained at different levels. And so that is the definition of a retaining wall. And so fences on top of retaining walls. So we have lots of them in town. They're a very common thing to do. Front yards, all yards. So we really thought it was important to address them. And with that said, they're not a huge problem. We don't spend a lot of code enforcement time dealing with fences and retaining walls, but we'd like to have clear guidance for applicants so they know what they can do. Neighbors can know what they could expect could happen, nearby. It becomes extra tricky when you have a fence on top of a retaining wall, and those combined, as Tracy just mentioned, those combined elements could end up with quite a large structure. And so our proposed additions to the code and clarifications will hopefully set clear parameters for everyone, and we'll end up with people having the ability to level their yard, because that's really what they're doing with their retaining wall. They're trying to level their yard either for a play area or a place to sit, or maybe just for a better garden, or reduce the slope of it. So they're trying to level their yard, and then they often want some type of fence to contain things in their yard or keep things out of their yard. So that's the general reason people have fences and retaining walls. So our first proposed new regulation is for, very similar to this picture that we just saw, on the front property line. Our new regulation would state you are allowed to have a maximum 3 foot tall retaining wall, and then you're required to have 2 feet of horizontal space for landscaping or some type of buffer, and then you're allowed a 4 foot fence on top of that. Or so it's set back, so you're not getting you're actually not getting this, because this is a wall on top of a fence. I'm sorry, a fence on top of a wall, but you're getting something a little bit more, even more of a buffer. So that is our proposed new regulation for fences on top of retaining wall.
I just want to add that what's new about it is the 2 foot setback. Right now, you could construct you could build up your yard with a 3 foot retaining wall, backfill it, flatten it out, and put a 4 foot fence on top of that wall under current regulations. And so the new part is the 2 foot setback from the wall.
You can still have a solid part. You can still have a solid part of the fence if it's still 4 feet right on the property line. Like if someone had a stone curb, let's say, and then 3'6" on top of that as wood. Because it would.
Yeah, we don't require any of it. We don't require it to be.
Okay, I just because there might be a little retention, but it seems kind of picky.
We did talk about that, whether like in this case, this require an open fence, and what's an open fence? How do you define that? It's a little tricky. So the second proposed regulation is for staying with the front yard. Say for some reason you want to go taller than 4 feet. Many homes, Christmas Tree Hill, Chapman Park, a lot of different areas, you have pretty tall fences. And my guess is people have those tall fences because they don't want the headlights blasting into their home at night. They want security. Hopefully the car won't break through the fence and go down. And so certainly many reasons people want taller than a 4 foot fence in the front. And we have many cases where they're illegal, but we hope to legalize them. And this will make a legal process for someone to build. Again, your retaining wall can only be 3 feet high. However, your fence can be 6 feet tall. And that's allowed through the design review process. So you need to go through design review, and you will need to, it would be a staff level design review, just like we do today on various projects. And if that's approved, you're allowed to have a 3 foot wall and a 6 foot fence in the front. And the next one is for interior, side, and rear yards. So your interior side and rear yard, you're allowed to have a 3 foot wall and a 6 foot fence, or you can go as high as 8 feet if you get the permission of the adjacent property or property owners, or you go through the design review process. So two ways to bump up from 6 to 8, but you can go 3 feet, 6 feet, a fence by right without any process. If you want to go from 6 to 8, you have to go through the process or get your neighbors okay. I'm sorry?
I think there's a typo on the slide. It says fence must be set back a minimum of 2 feet, but that's not where we're saying that it can be on top of the wall. If you're at the rear yard or the interior side yard, you can be on top of the wall with a 6-foot fence with no setback
Oh, yes.
required.
Thank you for catching that, Tracy.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, the next one is, we'll go back to you.
Back to me. So we haven't talked about the street side yard setback. If there's a retaining wall at street side, that, again, same limitations, up to 3 feet in height. And on this, in the blue line here would be allowed a 6-foot fence, and it would be required to be set back from that retaining wall by 2 feet, or you would get design review approval. So what I'm showing in the photo on the right would be the fence on top of a wall that we would, right now that's permitted by right in the photo. As long as they keep it 50 feet from the corner of the intersection, you can construct that fence shown in the photo just like that, and you don't need design review. And we're proposing to change that, where that particular fence and wall combination would need a design review if they don't set it back 2 feet from the edge of the wall. That makes sense?
I have a question of clarification. There's 2 streets.
Yep.
And it's 4 feet on one street and 4 feet and 6 feet on the other. How do you know which street is getting designated that way?
Which is the front?
Yeah.
Yeah, the front is the shortest property line abutting a street, and that's from our zoning ordinance.
Thanks.
And if they're the same, we'd have to decide, and those decisions are
Flip a
appealable
coin.
by a property owner.
And Dan, just for clarifying, so in this case, the lower street is the shortest one. And so that's the front property line, regardless of the address, regardless of where their front door is, and regardless of where their garage door is. In the planning world, your front property line is your shortest property line adjacent next to a street if you're on a corner. Makes sense.
Answer that now.
Okay.
So when, interject here, when we're looking at this, you're saying that the bottom right-hand leg of the blue, it's called the front, is that right?
Right.
But that's the larger setback. The side is the shorter.
Yeah, maybe I misspoke. The shortest property line adjacent to a street is
shortest
the front
length of property.
length of property line.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. So in the photograph, that looks like a non-conforming condition. It looks like the fence distance to the house appears to be less than 8 feet from that fence. I'm just looking at that, right? It's very short.
I'm not showing all the way to the corner of their property. It's the photo is cut off, but it's 50 feet from where sidewalk meets the rounded sidewalk. You find where those would meet if sidewalks were built at a right angle, and you measure back 50 feet. And so anything forward to that is a 4-foot fence. And this person didn't elect to do a 4-foot fence. And actually, they did get a survey to for other reasons, but it was helpful to make sure that they're in the right spot with the 6-foot fence.
So just to elaborate, since we're in this informal hearing, there are many home lots that have non-conforming setbacks, right? So the house is closer than what's allowable in some way,
Yep.
right? So it appears this is it. If you require them to set back that fence 2 feet from that retaining wall, they're left with feet or something like that to the fence.
Between the house and the fence.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
That could be,
Could
that could
be,
be the
yeah.
case, yeah.
Is that going to be something that they can appeal or?
They would
request?
probably in that case apply for a design review
Mhm.
and we would have an opportunity to require landscaping at the base of the wall to reduce the impact of the combined fence and wall at the streetscape side. Or potentially more of it is open than what they're showing. They're showing 8 inches or so open at the top, maybe more is open through the design review process. That would be an option for them if they wanted to apply for that. So
Okay.
that's
So
one of the regulations we're suggesting in this scenario is set it back or obtain design review if you're not going to set it back.
Okay, thank you. All right.
That answer your question?
Yes.
Here's just
So,
an,
Can
I'm
I
sorry,
ask
yeah.
a question
Yeah.
just about that picture? What's the total from the sidewalk? You measure
Right.
from the sidewalk or the little curb-like thing? Are you measuring the grade?
Say that again. You're measuring the height of the fence, you mean, or the distance?
The retaining wall.
That's a good question. The height of the retaining wall
In that
is
picture
3
what?
feet. What's visible is 3 feet.
Is
There's
3 feet.
yeah, there's additional wall buried in the ground, basically.
Okay, and then how tall is the fence on top of it?
The fence is 6 feet.
That's 6 feet?
Yes.
Okay, and so by the standard you're proposing, the 6-foot fence would be set 2 feet back from
2 feet, yep, back from the edge of the wall, closer to the house.
the retaining wall.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Or
But
They
do you
would
see
need
how
design-
that's sloped? It's kind of slopes up on the side there.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be even taller because the grade would be higher. And if it's measured from,
taller,
the
viewing
grade-
from the sidewalk.
would it be taller?
Well,
I'm not understanding how the grade is going to be measured that in that picture.
if the fence were moved 2 feet off of the retaining wall, it depends how they would construct it. If they wanted to flatten that area, but we would measure from wherever grade is on the high side of the fence. Want the microphone?
Thank you. So I think, so right, we're measuring, for this
Right,
structure here, we're measuring from here to there.
right.
I think you're asking what happens here. Is that what you're saying?
If it was 2 feet back,
If this was 2 feet back,
right? And do you see how the side slopes up?
uh-huh,
And so would that fence be even taller if it was 2 feet back? Because you're measuring from a higher point of the grade.
oh, I see. So you're saying if we shove this fence back 2 feet,
Right,
this point is going to be 6 inches higher or whatever, a foot higher.
whatever the grade is,
Um,
yeah. And then it's gonna be more than. That's a
That's a
massive,
good, maybe can you
building.
flip back to us, previous slide? Yeah, that's good. So actually one more. You're right, you're saying if this wasn't level,
yeah, if it was.
this wasn't horizontal, this one up here,
Right,
that's a good question.
that's a pretty massive
Right, you
amount
got this.
of height.
If I may, I think
Uh-huh.
the impact here by setting that back is that as a pedestrian, you don't have the mass of that kind of solid surface against the sidewalk. So even if you set it back and the effective height looks a little bit higher if you're on a slope, it's still going to reduce the impact to the pedestrian or to the streetscape. So that's really the goal of this.
I understand it. I just think 2 feet isn't an awful lot to decrease the impact of an even taller structure.
And I guess to add to what Amy was saying, also, the goal and the hope is that this will be planted
Right.
with vegetation. And so if this is planted with vegetation and it's horizontal or it's a slope, hopefully the vegetation can still survive and that buffering will take place. Whether this is flat or whether this is sloped.
But they wouldn't have to landscape it because they don't have to go through design review. Or do they? They would if they wanted a 6-foot fence.
No, right.
If in this case, this is front.
Side review.
Yeah, this is front. So maybe jump back one more, Tracy. So this is front permitted, no design review. So right, they can build this without talking to planning. And we will certainly ask them and request them to landscape it, but we have limited control over whether people landscape it and limited control over whether they maintain their landscaping.
Tracy, could you go to the next slide, please? That one there. So if this is front with design review, say in that 2-foot setback, you have a 2-to-1 grade.
Mhm.
So that would mean that the fence could be a foot higher. So that would make it 7 foot taller than the retaining wall. In this case,
Right.
They could propose that. They could ask for that. They don't get it necessarily, right? But I think what I hear Margaret going after here a little bit is there a way to say that the height of that fence cannot be more than 6 feet above the retaining wall height? Is that what you're after, Margaret?
Yeah, yeah. Or could it be a requirement to go through design review?
You could say, so that, so long as the combined of the two is not higher than 9. That's what, I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, this is the total. The total combined is 9. As Peter's example, if this was sloped, this total combined would be 10, 3 and 7 instead of 3 and 6. Is that
Right. So in the regulation, you could either put it in there that says you can't exceed 9 total from the front. And you're kind of stuck with that. That would mean that from the inside of that yard fence, you're stuck with essentially then a 5-foot fence. So that's a downside to the property owner wanting a 6-foot fence out there. He gets only a 5-foot fence. So on the outside, you don't want the wall. So you say it's a 9-foot height and you don't have that wall appearance. So the dilemma is, do you create a process for them to apply for the 3-foot, the 1 foot and the 6-foot height, or some way of weaving their way through that to get a taller fence that's 6 foot on the inside? Because that 6-foot fence is permitted height on other side yard and so forth, and rear yard. So I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know what to say about it. Okay.
I was going to bring this up later, but with the same conversation, I was a little concerned when I was looking at this because a lot of these retaining walls we're looking at in section, and most of this time we're going to be on a slope throughout a property line or in the front. And what Peter had suggested with a combination may work a little bit better to eliminate so much design review, because we're going to get situations where people start with a 2-foot and go to a 4-foot retaining wall. And then, where do you, how much of this design review do you want? Or you just, keep it,
I may not be understanding what you're saying, but
So
I just wanted to comment that the built up yard is limited in height to 3-foot retaining wall. Sometimes you have to hold up a slope and there's a cut, right? But that's actually effectively like really lowering where somebody's standing on a slope. And that cut, that's a different type of wall that we do allow, where you're not creating a built up yard for standing or seating or viewing or playing. And that's the type of wall that we're talking about here, and people are creating these built up yards. And all of a sudden the person, what starts out as a slope, it comes like this, and then they want to put a fence on top of it. So you see it. Here's another example.
Yeah, but we're showing sidewalks that are flat is what I'm saying. A lot of our sidewalks are on slopes.
Right, when this,
And if anybody, I'm just saying it's only got to be like a 6-foot grade before you go across 75 feet and it's above 3 feet.
yeah, actually, in this,
There's not a lot of latitude with that retaining wall and the fence is, no?
You can't go above 3 feet. So you'd have to step it as you go down
We step.
along. Yeah, you'd step the wall down as the grade goes down. It mirrors the grade of the sidewalk.
but this is the exact condition I think you're talking about, Jim. You probably can't see, it's kind of dark, but where the photographer is, that wall is 3 feet. At the end, where that opening is, that wall is 4 feet, maybe 4.5. I'm just guessing, but it clearly increases because I've been there. So that is a retaining wall that ranges from 3 feet to 4 feet within that section. So I think that's what you're pointing out, Jim.
Yeah, correct. And I just, also just, is this something that could stay on, when we talk about design review, are we talking about a staff design review? Or are we talking about coming to the commission for an approval of something like this? You guys have
Staff.
discretion on stuff like this? Because it's, if we're talking about between 3 and 4 feet. Or,
Well, I think it'd be good to clarify whether or not we're talking about any changes to the retaining wall heights as part of this current proposal, because right now it's limited to 3 feet in height in any side or rear setback. And I don't think that was proposed to be altered at all as part of
No.
this discussion, but
No.
I mean, that can be a discussion. So that what if it was actually higher than 3 feet at any point on that picture, it would have been a non-compliant condition. That doesn't mean that they didn't build it that way. It's
Sure.
not, in terms of what we tell applicants today, what
Mhm.
they're allowed to do, it's max 3-foot high retaining walls in your setbacks. Period.
correct. I just say that because when we're talking about leveling yards, we're talking about a retaining wall that
Yes.
does not step, because it can't step if it's level. If you got slope here and you're leveling a yard, your retaining
Well,
wall is
but
going to be bigger than
again,
one side.
what we've tell people is that yard has to step then down with the grade as well.
Yeah, the applicant would have to figure out how to level
I mean-
their yard or portions of their yard without exceeding the 3-foot wall height.
Right. And yeah,
And actually in that application, that the photo I was showing earlier, they have a step in their wall, in their rear yard. They have another wall because they had to limit it to 3 on that street side setback. So they have a little tiny terrace, even though it's a pretty flat lot on Birch Avenue.
Would it be a design, but I'm going back to design review on something like that? Is it a staff design review or is
we
it?
don't have any right now. There's no opportunity. Designer, you can't apply for a design review to go above 3 feet in height on a retaining wall. That would have to be there's an application for variance potentially if there's unique conditions, but there's no design review currently allowed to go exceed that height.
Would that make it easier? For staff?
Well,
or
it's a
would it be
consideration. I know it's not something, it's mostly, this has been like the retaining wall discussion and how to deal with the retaining wall and the fence issue. We did just deal with an applicant who wanted to do a 4-foot high retaining wall in the rear yard and then a fence on top of that.
Mhm.
Now you're dealing with, I think to Commissioner Bendel's point, even higher. Now you're 10-foot combined on the street side or on the back of that, but there may be certain instances where that's okay. I mean, so it's, I think in general, from staff's perspective, we're trying to, we'd rather do less we'd rather not get into design review processes if we can come up with a standard that generally works. I mean, obviously, for the vast majority of properties, but perhaps this is, there's a reason to get into design review for these types of situations. I mean, that's a good question to sort of ask the commission. And if you see enough of these conditions where you want some flexibilities, or maybe you call it an exception or exemption or something like that, and you have specific criteria that you could put in place, or staff level, or at a staff level, you could do certain things that currently aren't allowed by the code today to do.
Are there enough situations where that would help you guys to have exceptions? Or is it something that doesn't come up enough to where we should take it in consideration?
I think,
What's that? I have a tough question.
No, no.
Just the question came up of procedurally, what part of the meeting is this? I think we're still at questions to presentation.
Oh,
Sorry, yeah. Okay, we need to let you guys finish.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. Yeah, we got in the weeds there a little bit.
No, it's a good point.
If you just clarification.
Sure.
The picture that showed, I think that one there, that would be a condition that could be done on a rear yard or side yard. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right,
Okay.
take it away, Tracy.
We saw this for just a second before we got into some detailed discussion, but just showing an example on the left under these proposed draft regulations would be something that would be permitted by right, no design review required. And on the right, if it's hard to see, but that is a 4-foot fence on top of a wall. And that would require a design review in the front yard if they don't want to set that back 2 feet.
So that's kind of a real life example of, I think, the real life example of the benefits of the buffer between retaining wall and fence. And obviously, the positive is to the community and the streetscape. The negative is their front yard is smaller. Compared to in this case, it's not really true compared to the person on the right, but if the person on the left did the same thing, they may have a larger front yard, but it's not as attractive looking. Okay. So next steps, as I kind of alluded to before, is take all this information that we've done, that we've compiled and heard from you folks and members of the public over the last a year, actually, process, and bring this back to you with all the information. Hopefully you've all retained it all, and we make all the correct changes and give you a draft zoning ordinance amendment to review. And then once you've reviewed it and hopefully blessed it, you will provide hopefully a positive recommendation to the council and bring it to them, and they will make the final decision. Anything else, Tracy, you have? Nope. Fade to black.
No.
fade to black. That's what you said.
All right, time for questions.
Time for questions, yes.
Before I turn it over, just a thing about the retaining wall. So this whole aspect is about fences and retaining walls, property lines, that kind of thing. So typically anything over 3 foot of a retaining wall or under 3 foot, in this case, is not a building permit. It's just a landscaping wall. Is that fair to say? Or do they need a building permit to build a 3 foot retaining wall? Is there a difference between a 3 foot and a 4 to 6 foot retaining wall?
I believe, and Jason might know better than that, I believe that the building code says if there's a surcharge on that wall. And so if there's a slope, then I don't know if there's a height limit. I think it's a matter of just if there's a surcharge on a wall.
And they measure height, including the footing. So a 3 foot wall is going to include the 4 foot or whatever footing that's below it. So to the building department, that's not a 3 foot wall, and it needs a building permit. So you're right that very low garden walls sometimes do not need a building permit.
But sometimes do.
Some do.
Sometimes do.
So,
All right,
so,
so
yeah.
these retaining walls that are in the photos, 3 foot and lower, kind of fall into that. No need to get a structural plan building permit.
Well, if there were a retaining wall, they're retaining earth, so that would.
Yeah, the 3
If
foot
it's just a
wall.
wall and the ground behind it's level and it's not supporting any earth behind it, then what you're saying is it wouldn't require a
Yeah,
building permit.
these built up yards, because they're being backfilled where it's not presently a level grade, are obtaining building permits.
Hmm.
There used to be an elevation, a height at which you didn't need to get a building permit in many municipalities, or a garden, even if it's holding dirt behind it.
Mhm.
I don't recall what that is, and it's probably changed over the years.
Yeah, I think it has. And Martha and I actually just discussing that half hour before we started, and we will certainly look into that. Find out exactly when a building permit is required for a retaining wall. What are the
And how does,
factors?
and if or does that impact this effort, to say little retaining wall at the property line or somewhere in there? Is there a difference for people?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you as a body in town wanted people to be able to build a certain size retaining wall and a certain size fence and not have to go through the planning process and not have to go through the building permit process, then we could probably figure out what that is and say, here's a way to get a retaining wall and a fence without any process. Here's a way to get it with a building permit and no planning. Here's a way to get it with a building permit and planning.
We have those same discussions today about fences. Or how tall can they be? Where can they be located? When do I need a permit for it?
Okay.
Yep.
Well, Daniel, do you want to fire anything back at staff here?
Sure. We use the term neighbor's permission. I presume we really mean property owner's permission.
Yes,
And is there a definition? Or are we using the word property owner or are we using the word neighbor? And if we use the word neighbor, is there a definition?
We have said neighbor in our slide, but I think we will write the code to say property owner and property owner or property owners, plural, if there's more than one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's better than.
Just if I could chime in, just to be clear, the current code, existing code says, I think, neighbor, correct?
looking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I think that, so it already exists. This is sort of,
It says written approval from all owners of property contiguous with the property line nearest the
all right,
fence.
so good.
Okay,
We
so
say,
it says
we say
owner.
owners of
Okay.
property.
Yes, we will mirror that. Thank you.
Should we consider a definition for retaining wall, particularly given this conversation about building permits and so forth? So be clear, we're not talking about a freestanding wall and a fence, but something that's retaining earth. That's a question for staff.
Mhm.
The diagrams show 2 feet from the back of the wall. And I think that's good. But the language, I don't think describes it that way. And I say that because, walking around today, I noticed some of these walls are a foot deep or more. And so you really only have 1 foot of planting area.
Good point.
I wonder if we should consider, and this is going to be something that's maybe not in your plans, but the definition of a front yard as being the shortest street on a corner lot, and whether for certain streets in town, whether that should in fact define the front yard. For example, on Tamalpais, you have a corner lot on Tamalpais, so now they can build a 6-foot fence on that Tamalpais side where the front door is facing the side street. So I'm just thinking that, on these major thoroughfares in town,
Mhm.
I think the front ought to be on those streets as we define it. So that's a consideration. I don't know how other commissioners feel about that.
Mhm.
Let's see. What would be the issues with requiring planting of that area between the retaining wall and the fence? Now, I know there's an issue of like, okay, well, how do we enforce it? But
Mhm.
maybe enforcement isn't the issue as much as just suggesting to the person doing it that landscaping would help soften the fence. And maybe we could even just say, I don't know how we define landscaping, but
Uh-huh.
it's something I'd like to see considered. And just looking around today again, walking around neighborhoods, it made such a difference in my mind to have something growing. Doesn't have to be tall necessarily, even if it's like Russian sage or something like that. It just really changes the whole hardness of that wall and fence, 6-foot fence. Uh, the safety railing question. I guess, if safety railing is required, that would be determined by the building inspector. And then would have to meet, 42-inch, 4-inch spacing
Mhm.
as a safety railing.
Correct.
Okay. Well, the only other thing, I'd ask is about the question about property owner's permission and how that's gone in the past. My concern, and I know this has been something that the commission has sort of supported in the past, but that it encumbers the future owner of that adjacent property to some decision the previous property owner has made. And whether it's just better to leave it as design review rather than allowing someone to also just get adjacent property owner's permission.
I guess I think that's getting the adjacent property owner's permission is allowing the applicant to move forward without going through the time and money to go through design review. So if they're in agreement, then they go, you can build it. But certainly it doesn't, I certainly hear your point.
Okay, that's my questions for now, Peter.
Oh, thank you. Okay. I tend to agree with you about that design review. Hey, Margaret, you have some further questions from staff?
Yeah. Let me just say, I find these pictures really helpful. And I know it was a lot to put together, but it's really helpful. And Tracy, the picture that you made with the two and the lines, the colored lines, that is probably the most understandable thing I've seen. It really laid it out, and it's
Take a
very
handout out.
clear, what you can and can't do as you first look at it. So is this retaining wall a variance required? Would that be a variance?
It's, hold on.
It's the one with the driveway, park area.
I don't know if it had a variance, but if to construct something like
By
that.
today's standards, would
By
it
today's
be-
standard.
Yes.
Yes,
Excuse
it
me?
would,
Yeah.
we need a variance by today's standards, yes.
Okay. And
Well, maybe it's on Summit, so there's a flexible front yard setback on Summit that's through the design review process, decisions can be made to allow structures to occupy the front yard setback, where in the flats, that's not allowed. And that's been in place since the 90s, and it's done through design review. And the purpose of that, the reason for that on the hill is many properties have no access
right.
to their site and would have to build something that projects really far off of a front yard, and that's going to increase the height of the structure when viewed from below. And so, for those reasons, I think decision makers in the past have said, that the front yard setback can be reduced through a design review, and that may be how that particular wall happens. So it removes the variance process really for Christmas tree.
And then this last picture, I don't know how that happened, but it's one of the most awful things I've seen.
That's
That's a
down in
s-
Redwood?
I don't know what
That's the house we reviewed,
Yeah,
right?
we'll probably be dealing with that when the house is nearing completion. That's the
Yes.
neighbor to the
The neighbor, the neighbor to the west installed that to screen herself from the construction that has been going on for quite some time.
I just, and this is another bad example. Some of these I just can't believe. If I live near this, I mean, I live near a pretty horrible thing going on anyway. Big.
Daddy, there's quite a few of those actually.
But
That's
this
a
is
rear yard.
really, if we say that something has to be landscaped, I think there has to be something that says it has to be maintained. And it has to be enforced. And that's just the way it has to be. Because there's no point in saying something has to be done or has not to be done if we're not going to enforce it. That's just, the way it is. I agree with Daniel thinking we have to define a retaining wall because there are lots of different ways to think about that. So that's what I have so far.
Point of clarification, so the redwood is is that an enforcement action underway?
No, I just noticed it when I drove by it like last week, but
It is not currently underway. Many issues with that property that we're working on to try to just get that building done. But certainly is something we can pursue.
Okay, no, I just asking,
It may have been there when we did our design review.
this was, but that was not. Not that high. This is
Not
all,
that-
those are
not
all,
that high.
those are all new posts. That's all new. They made it look. Okay. Not public meeting content.
I had one more question.
Yeah.
There was one diagram picture where there was the man standing lower than the. It seems to me that would interfere with that person's line of sight if the fence was that high and there was something behind it. So it didn't require a design review, and I think there's no way that somebody could complain that their line of sight was being blocked by that fence. Yeah.
So this is an interior side or rear yard condition.
Okay.
And
But still, if the view of Mount Tam was over there,
correct.
that fence would block it.
Yes, it would, and their house could block it as well. The house to the far right.
Depending on how the house was set on the lot.
Yeah, and whether it's a single story house or 2-story house, and
most of the time.
yeah, that's sort of the compromise or the challenge between the yard on the right wants a 6-foot high fence for their privacy, perhaps for dogs, kids, whatever it may be.
So I think part of at some point we have to address the priorities of view.
Sure.
What comes first, the fence or the view? What's our highest priority?
Right, and in this case, also I would say the persons to the right, their yard, they want a flat yard, so they put up a 3-foot retaining wall. Now they have a flat yard, and they want a 6-foot fence. So, I agree that's a compromise or decision that needs to be made. What is more important, the yard privacy value of the person to the right, or the view, sunlight, privacy, the person to the left?
And with that big fence, what happens to the vegetable garden planted in the shade of that fence? Well, it's come up before.
Could be a jacuzzi there too.
Just saying.
Just saying, right? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Rizzo here, who has always got a good list of thoughts.
Guys have done such a good job. It's dwindling down. I'm gonna kind of talk about the 50-foot street side 4-foot fence. I'm going to ask the question, why didn't we use like the vision triangle that some of the other jurisdictions used. I'm a little concerned that it's pretty extreme because the front yard setback is 20 feet. And are we requiring this fence to go a little bit further back than it really needs to for the purpose?
It can be quite a distance sometimes. It's not a new regulation. And we're generally, when we're explaining it, people are able to meet that, no matter if it's a flat lot or a sloping lot. And Public Works has a diagram that they use that includes some of that site triangle language. And this is more restrictive than that.
I don't know if it was Novato or.
Yeah, I mean, that's the
Petaluma.
The example we're showing the staff report, Jim, is from Petaluma, and they're showing a 35-foot long, 35 feet instead of 50 feet vision triangle. So I'm assuming Public Works came up with 50 feet.
Yeah, it's
I don't know.
pretty old regulation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can chat with them.
Yeah, I was just wondering if, because if it correlated a little bit to the front yard setback, which is pretty mostly typical in our area, which was 20 feet mostly. Then you'd, just lay that out and it would probably be 35 feet. But I'm also concerned the fact that we don't have sidewalk corners on every corner in Corte Madera. So, how would we figure that out?
Apply logic and reason and estimate based on, and it's not in our code, like how exactly to measure it. It's just been a consistent practice of staff to measure it in that way. And so a lot of times we talk with Public Works too and get their assistance in what's the most appropriate, because that's the intent really of the regulation, is to make sure you're not affecting vehicles or pedestrians if there is a sidewalk.
But the question really, so it derived from a Public Works kind of standard that's a little bit older, perhaps, the 50 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
And previous jurisdiction where I worked, the fence had to be open too, and they defined 50% open so you could see through that vision triangle with the fence. So that's another alternative.
You have something to say?
Yeah.
And then we kind of went over my question just about the grade. And I think you guys had answered that when you were making your presentations.
Uh-huh.
I don't have anything else other than comments. Thank you.
Jim, you disappoint me there.
Pressure.
Yeah, I was thinking that Palo Alto had a stiffer one, but they're also 35, it appears. But you guys put together this consortium of this gathering of different regulations. Goes from Mill Valley that appears to have almost nothing, right, about this, as I read it, to Novato and Petaluma that have really robust stuff. As always, you guys are trying to create something that you can point to when you're standing at the counter processing applications and not create a lot of work for yourself, but you've got something that's better than what we have in a way. We've dealt with some of this stuff on problem applications or problem neighbors. We've seen that. And so this would help define what is possible. It doesn't prevent abuse, but it gives you some tools to work with here, right? So
Exactly.
I agree with, I don't have any other questions, but I think Daniel's point about defining this neighbor permission thing is always a risky road to go down with that. But maybe there's a definition for that is less subjective to the current owner resident. I don't know. So that would put the onus on you guys to define it, not the neighbors to do that. So that's the problem. Did we do, in our design review, did we do deck heights at fences? We did that previously, right? When we were talking about decks up against fences and all that stuff.
Yes, we did.
So we're not dealing with, that's gonna be in your,
In the grand summary,
yeah,
yes.
grand summary, right? I really think that, you guys have struck a good chord here, but, I'll take it to the other commissioners who, want to comment. You guys have anything else you want to add to this discussion at this point?
No, I think we've got it covered.
I did have one other thing, Peter, which is
Yeah.
that in the Tiburon code, item 3 says fences, including walls used as fences, shall not, should wear my glasses, should not be located, designed, or constructed so as to impair safe vision from vehicle, or pedestrians. And I'm wondering if adding some general language like that, which would maybe give you a little flexibility if, besides the 50 feet aside, if there's a particular grade or situation, it would give you maybe some teeth to be able to require something different.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah, it's a great idea.
Okay,
I have one more question, Peter.
Yeah.
I think that, I don't know if this is on page 3, in the beginning, it says fences less than 7 feet do not require a permit. Should that be 6 feet?
No, that's correct. Require a building permit. So a fence that's 7 feet or greater
Building code.
requires a building permit, because I guess if it's 7 feet tall, it falls over, it's problematic. That's-
okay, so it really seems like we're at the, favorable point of trying to give you some, oh yeah, gee, how could I forget? I did. Thank you. Tracy, we're gonna open this to public comment. If there's anybody online that wants to have public comment,
There is one person with their hand raised. That's Gabby.
please, Gabby. Yeah.
Hi. The reason I was calling you guys, could you hear me?
Yes.
Could you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Well.
Now we don't hear you. Gabby, are you there?
Hello?
Yes, now you're back. Hello, go ahead.
Hello?
Gabby, we hear you.
Okay. Mainly, I live in a. Our house is.
It's not working. You could try a different call in or try
Cell phones or?
see what do I
From Jeff.
let's try Jeff.
Evening, everyone. How's it going?
Go ahead.
Us.
All right, how about now? You guys hear me? Testing, testing.
Jeff, we hear you.
Okay, now great. Sorry about that. I just wanted to reiterate there was a point earlier that is very interested in hearing about the definition or the reasoning behind a 3-foot retaining wall versus a 4-foot potential. I heard that mentioned earlier in the meeting, and I was the recent applicant, I believe, mentioned. So just curious to hear your thoughts and comments on that.
Okay, thank you. Has Gabby come back?
I'll come back.
Well, we'll leave it open in case she wants to rejoin. Would you guys care to answer that 3 to 4 foot question in the meantime? That gentleman's question was.
He-
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought he was asking for the commissioner's thoughts on whether or not a 4 foot, changing the 3 foot wall that's allowed to be a 4 foot instead. Is that?
I thought he was asking for a definition from staff about that, but
Oh.
no,
No,
so you heard it differently. Yeah.
Yeah, the code states 3 feet, 3 feet. If the commission and the town wants to bump that up to 4, it's certainly something we can talk about and we can propose. I don't see any significant advantage or, I mean, it's
All right.
it's a 1 foot difference.
We could take that up then. All right. Thank you for that clarity. I misheard. Okay. No Gabby, huh? All right. We'll close that then, since Gabby's not returning. She could email you.
Yes, I was going to say, Ann and I were just talking, if Gabby, if you like, you may email us your question to pboyle@tcmmail.org.
Or even easier is public comment at tcmmail.org.
Or just run down here. What the heck? Okay, so let's talk about you guys, your thoughts on a summary of each of your contributions to this and what you want to provide feedback on. So, Daniel, you had some comments before. Would you care to summarize those again?
Well, I think asking for a definition of retaining wall. It seems like the code defines neighbor as owner, but I think just make sure neighbor doesn't show up in the final version. I think maybe adding that language from the Tiburon code relative to the sight lines for pedestrians and vehicles, just to give you some discretionary flexibility. I would like the staff to consider whether the definition of the front yard might be reconsidered or modified if it's facing onto a major thoroughfare, which would then mean you wouldn't end up with a 6 foot high fence on a major thoroughfare. It'd only be, the 3 foot retaining wall and the 4 foot fence. The other thing I think, again, I still think this idea that person could get permission from neighbors besides prejudicing the next owner of that property. It seems to me it's somewhat unfair if one party has very good relationship with their neighbors and down the block, for whatever reason, there's controversy, and for the same exact situation, causing the same exact situation visually and so forth, that person can't do it. So I really, really prefer those situations to go to staff review than saying that someone gets a letter from their 3 neighbors and they can do this exemption. That's my own personal opinion. I think that's it.
Okay. Define that in one sentence.
Define.
That last statement about
Well, I think it would say that it would just, we would eliminate the possibility that you could get signed off by 3 neighbors, or depending corner lot, I guess would be potentially 2 neighbors. And we just leave it, if they want to exceed the code, they just go for staff design review. Let the staff decide rather than prejudicing the property.
Right. All right. Thank you. Hi, Margaret.
I would second what Daniel said. I agree with all of those comments. And I would add that if in fact a neighbor or the owner of the next door property feels that a fence of any size is going to interfere with the sight line of view, then it has to come to design review. Or be reviewed in some way.
Any fence? You saying any fence, even if it's 6 feet? If it's a standard fence, that's part of our,
Well, I think that, in the situation that diagram showed or the picture showed, even though it was 6 feet, it's maybe on a slope, or it may be something happening. And I think until we figure out the priorities and what the idea of view really is, I think it needs to come to somebody who's not who's a more of a neutral party to evaluate it.
That's it. Okay. So just to delve into that, give it some credence a little, or some basis here. Have we come across any fences that have blocked the view? I'm just asking. I don't know. They're low typically. Have you guys heard of anybody say that fence blocked my view? I don't know.
I haven't, and we do have an awful lot of letters coming to the town where parties are agreeing to an 8-foot fence, not necessarily on top of a wall. And one design review decision made by staff that was appealed for a fence in the last 6 years. How long's Doug been gone?
Yes, I will point out that the infamous fence and hot tub project that I worked on and you all worked on, they did at one point, one of the property owner did raise the fact that they felt the fence at a certain point within their yard blocked their view. And so I think it goes back to the design review process was that blocking of their view a significant impact. And the neighbors thought it was, and staff thought it wasn't, and I believe planning commission thought it wasn't. They still had the ability to view Mount Tam or Christmas Tree Hill, whatever they were looking at, with that I'll just call it a 6-foot fence, not in all points of their yard, but in a significant point of their yard, their deck. So that was, that's the discretionary process.
Okay.
But I would say overall, it's quite rare for a fence to come up as a view obstruction.
Could I? Yeah, and I would agree with that. But I think there's maybe a larger question here to discuss if you want to get into fences and views and design review. And I think a couple of things are important just to remember. So right now, the rules are you can build a 6-foot fence. No design, it's a building permit, no design review. As soon as we start saying there's some subjectivity, whether it's a 6-foot fence or any height fence, could be 4 feet, and somebody could say potentially that their view's blocked from when I lay down on my lawn and I want to look out and see the bay, that 4-foot fence is blocking my view and I want that right to it. As soon as we open that up, that becomes a design review process with subjectivity findings. You all know the findings that are associated with that. Blocking views can be appealed by the neighbor. Long, lengthy process. Fees are involved for paying for town's time and materials and all that stuff. So a simple thing like a fence, as soon as you say it requires staff review, design review, something like that, it can be a very long, complicated process. So right now we have 6-foot fences that are allowed, essentially what we call by right, no planning review required. You are allowed to go up to 8 feet. And again, this is this additional 2 feet. And then I think Phil mentioned this earlier, but the reason we say, or if you get the approval of your property, the property owner on the other side of that fence, skip the $1,320, skip the potential appeal process. You guys already agree. We know that's not going to happen. Go ahead and do the extra 2 feet, the extra 2 feet of fence height and move on. That's really trying to accommodate essentially lowering the cost of construction, neighbors who agree. The vast majority of the situations where there's actually good neighbor relations and not add additional fees to that construction of the fence already. I mean, so there is something, I think that's what the framers of that code originally had in mind. That said, if there is an agreement and they still want to go to 8 feet, then you do allow for the design review process. That same applicant who wants to go to 8 feet then has the option of coming before and going through that design review process at a staff level. Ultimately, might be appealed, as we saw in that one instance on Oakdale with the hot tub fence. Could ultimately come to the planning commission. Could ultimately go to the town council over the 2 feet or one additional foot height of fence. So I think it's good to recognize reasons why we have no design review. As whether, we generally try to create rules that work for the vast majority of the town and situations. It may not work for 100%, but it also has the benefit for those 98% of the times of not adding the additional cost, uncertainty, and overall, overall the uncertainty and the costs associated with going through a process that may end up, lasting a good deal of time and energy and effort. And, we've seen those processes play out. It's a balance. Mm-hmm. It is a balance overall of what types of things we're going to allow. And that's what we're trying to discuss with these additional standards here. How do we make them better for the vast majority of situations without sort of requiring maybe additional process where, there may be instances where, it may not work out perfectly for everybody, but for the vast majority of the time, maybe it does. So you have to balance that. I mean, you could go into a situation where everything requires design review, and I think they do. And maybe Anne, not, but Belvedere, I can tell you, hedges, the height of hedges will go down to design review, and you open that every single thing you build on our property, but that is going to require time, energy, money. So, I mean, it's just a balancing of where we want to be on that spectrum of how strict and how locked down we want to be in just terms of discretionary permitting, appeal processes, town processes versus creating standards that work for the vast majority of the time. And there may be some instances where it doesn't.
So Adam, if you look at the cities, towns that staff looked at, how many of them have a procedure where the neighbors could sign off on something beyond code?
Good question. I haven't looked at it.
Or maybe Amy, you could answer that?
Or Tracy.
On your experience?
I think.
I would say it is pretty common to have that option and I've seen it work well in other jurisdictions, but I know Phil and Tracy have looked at a lot of other ones recently.
And I just wanted to add that, neighbors, they need to agree on fences all the time, no matter what the height is, who pays for it, where is it located, what is it made of, when is it built, and how high it is. And that's sort of helpful to have this actually in the code, because there's so many other things that neighbors, when they build a fence on a property line, have to agree on to give them, if they want the 8-foot fence, just ask. And if they say no, then maybe they never even come to us with a proposed 8-foot fence, because they know their neighbor has said, I don't want that.
So if they apply for a building permit for a fence, the neighbor has to agree on what the material is and the color and all that?
No, but generally speaking, when you work with your neighbor on a fence, you're talking about all those things, right?
But that's not required.
It's not required, but I'm saying that all those conversations are happening. And the only required part is that if it's over 6, that neighbor has to provide written permission, that property owner has written permission for us to allow it to be over 6 feet in height. And if they're unwilling to provide it, then they apply for design review. And we haven't seen that a lot.
And just to, piggyback on that, Tracy, property fences are normally on property lines, and property lines technically have no width. And so if you are installing a fence on a property line, you're trespassing on your neighbors. And so in Petaluma, you have to, you come in for a fence permit, and you have to get your neighbor's signature that he or she agrees that we're putting this fence on the property line, and we both agree. And we don't require them to go get a survey, because they're going to agree, this is where the fence has always been. We think it's on the property line. It blew down in the storm. We want to build another one. And they go off and they build a fence. So we don't require that step. But as Tracy started out, majority of fences are constructed by multiple parties, and they're all in agreement, and they go up and everything works out fine.
Can I just say something?
Mhm.
Adam addressed the 98%, and I certainly understand that. But what I think ought to be built into anything that we talk about here is, what does that 2% do? I think we need to pay as much attention to the 2% as we do to the majority. And I think in a small town the size of Corte Madera, we have the ability and the privilege of being able to address those concerns also. And I don't think that just because the majority of people have it one way, and I think this is a very good way. I think it's a great way, in fact. I do think that there ought to be recourse for the 2%, and I don't think it comes along so often, and I don't think it's so burdensome that those people who are our neighbors shouldn't have an opportunity to have their say.
Staff, can you address I think you said something before about what their possible remedies are? If they can appeal, what can happen to a neighbor who does not agree with what another neighbor is doing?
Well, if they can,
Go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
what can a neighbor
It
do?
depends what it is. I
Right.
You have to explain, like,
No,
in what
I'm
situation.
just saying,
Like a 6-foot high-
this man whose view, and I'm talking about a major view, not a view of another house.
Again, we've.
No, Mount Tam is a different view than a house. It is.
But it's okay. We've talked about views, and I know we can go down that road again, but it depends from where you're standing. So right, what part of the fence? It becomes a very complicated.
Well,
That's
this
not
guy's
something
gonna
that
have
staff
to
is going to be
stand
able
for
to
that.
sort of determine on its own without sort
And
of.
that's
being
why
influences.
there ought to be a way for that particular person to have someone else,
But I think you have to
help with that
define.
decision.
You have to define that characteristic in code and say this situation, whatever this situation is, would require a design review.
Okay, then.
And I don't know,
Mhm.
it's almost an impossible task. One of the ways I think, and this is something that Amy brought up before, was in this case, do you want to require the setback from the retaining wall? These are two houses on two different, and I think Phil touched on this, but these are two different grades. The house is built up on the right. You see their first floor is already above the house on the left. And so, yeah, maybe they're filling in at the very end where the 3-foot retaining wall is, but you could step back that the fence on top of that 2 feet, have some greenery or whatever it is. And that would, obviously the view angle, depending on where you're looking at it, gets pushed back a little bit. But you're never going to be able to define that situation in which it's impacted. You're going to have to say every situation between those two properties has to be reviewed.
I disagree with you. And I think we've dealt with it before in the hot tub issue, which did take a lot of time, but it's not the majority of things we do here.
No, but I mean, trying to define that relationship is extremely difficult. I think this is the best way to actually create something that works is by talking about the standards here. Otherwise, I don't know how you define that situation, that relationship in which that is required to be reviewed at a staff level, and then you have design review, and then you have the appeal process versus other situations where it's not, it's okay. So either you review it all, or you basically say, talking about fence here, we're talking about the fence and the retaining wall. I mean, obviously we say when you're building onto a house, there's those thresholds of design review are very clear. And we've said those are going to be impactful. But even there, you know, you're allowed to build onto a house 249 square feet today. And it's, as long as it's lower than 15 feet in height, there's no design review. We've created that threshold of saying that's okay. We're not going to put people through that situation. So I think it's important to think about, we can look at particular situations where it doesn't work. You can look at particular, all the situations where it may work and it does work. Even this, I think it's very unclear to say why that isn't okay. I mean, you have to draw out the exact topography and the houses and the roof lines, and then what's behind it. And, so it comes down to a very.
And what I'm hearing is that you don't think the 2% is worth it.
No, I'm not saying that. I think it's certainly, I don't even know if 2% is the right number, but I mean, it's going to be, I would say yes, actually, probably. I think you have to create the rules for the vast majority of the situations in which it works, or you're creating a process by which we have design review for pretty much everything. And I don't think we have it becomes a capacity issue of being able to process that. It becomes a cost issue for people who are going through the process and want to build something. And it becomes just a very time consuming process. So I think those are important considerations that need to be considered. I will tell you my experience in New York City, they would build 60-story skyscrapers in front of
I don't think we could.
$1 million condominium, very high priced, valued. No, but I'm saying those were done by right. I mean, if they met the standards of the planning zoning code, you could build it. And there's lots of places where I think that's the case. And so it's just a balance on like how much process and time and energy you want to put the majority, I'd say the 100% through versus, making it for the 2%. That's the question. Do you want to put everybody through the process for the 2%, or do you want to do what sort of benefits the 98%? And maybe there's a couple of examples, like we're talking about 2% where it sort of impacts them negatively. I think that's the framework in which to sort of think about the design review.
Thank you, Adam. Any other contribution to that, Margaret?
I could, but I won't.
All right. I hear you. All right, Mr. Rizzo.
So, Peter and Daniel, so are you both aligned with, you don't feel like by right the retaining wall 3 feet and 6 feet should be a by right code
Or side yard and rear yard?
for side yard and rear yard
I'm okay with that.
I am too.
by right for
Yes.
those two? But
Right.
once they go to an 8-foot thing, that should go to a design review.
Yeah.
Because that becomes more like a tunnel.
Right.
Okay. All right. Then. Yeah, we got to have some sort of standards that are by right at some point.
Yeah.
And also, we're not going to have enough. There's not enough time in the day to review everything. I do want to go back to the one thing that I would kind of like to tweak is just, could we have a combination of not a maximum of 9 feet as a parameter, so that if the retaining wall needs to tweak up or something that we're not. So the overall height on the lower side never gets larger than 9 feet, but maybe the retaining wall. Could there be some sort of provision that by right you can have 6 and 3, but if the combination doesn't exceed 9 feet, that would be okay to be a by right? And the only reason I say that is because of the natural topography and how.
No, I personally, I would be in support of that. Yeah, you call it 9 foot limitation, right?
A clarification, are you saying the retaining wall could be higher than 3 feet?
Yes, but the fence would have to be lower. So the combination of the two you couldn't have an obstruction any larger than 9 feet. Just for practicality of building, there's definitely things that come up in the field where it might be 42 inches here and 24 inches down here, and I don't get support for that. That's fine too. I was just curious if that was something that would be an opportunity to make process easier. And then I'd also like to just have staff take a look at that, the visibility and the visual triangle, because I think it'd be easier to find it where the property line is at the corner than it is to be more consistent with where the corner is I always get this mixed up front yard situation. So I think we're really trying to make sure that we have visibility coming around the corner. And I think that the biggest problem is really the setback of the house, not necessarily where the street corner is.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of those cases where it's gray, Public Works sends out, and I think they kind of, at least my impression is they make the call because safety is first and paramount, and they know what safety is in terms of visualization and traffic, that type of thing.
Yeah, I was just saying that 'cause this is a pretty old code, and I mean, going 50 feet back, my sidewalk's 6 feet, and then I got a 20-foot setback to my house. Now we're talking about going back on the side an additional, 15 feet, the 4-foot fence, and I think that's kind of extreme.
Got it. So you want us to look at maybe perhaps reducing the 50 feet down to 35 or something else.
Something like that. That kind of makes sense. That correlates with the setbacks is what I'm getting at, because we're on really small lots. It's not a ton of lots that are over 5,000 square feet. I know our R1 code is 7,500, but there's not a vast majority of those larger lots. So I guess my direction would be just to maybe looking to maybe decreasing that a little bit, relaxation of that code a little bit.
And the end goal of that would be that you have the ability to create more privacy in the front or in side yard, or
more privacy on the side yard, because otherwise honestly, it's not, your visual angle is going to be cut off way before the 50 feet. So I just think it's limiting to a lot on the corner. That's it. You see another.
You would have, wouldn't you have on what's defined as the front yard, the 50 feet wouldn't matter because you can only build a 4-foot fence, right? So it would be the side street
side one is the one I'm concerned about is, you're basically making someone do a 4-foot fence halfway down their house.
Mm-hmm.
Which where they could have bedrooms there and all sort of thing, and people, want to keep that 6-foot fence probably as long as they want.
Right.
Just feeling like it's a bit extreme for most of the conditions in Corte Madera.
Yeah, we can definitely look at that. We'll talk to Public Works, get their take. And I also just wanted to, I think, Dan, you had mentioned before I forget that you wanted to make sure that we measure the 2 feet horizontal from the back of the retaining wall, like this image shows. But we should say that in words as well.
There was one thing I forgot in my summary, Peter, which was either a requirement or recommendation for landscaping between the retaining wall and the fence. And I prefer regulation, but if it's not enforceable, I know other places we use the word encourage, so I think adding that would be good.
A landscaping plan submittal for that design review would be a way to include that, right? Say, submit a landscape plan with your design review.
Yeah, and they would not get sign off from planning until the wall, the fence, and the landscaping are completed per plan. In a design review application.
But it's not designed.
In a design review application.
But if you're
Yes.
doing as of right, fence.
But as of right,
Yeah.
again, they don't even have to walk in the door. So if they do walk in the door, we'll say, yeah, you can build that by right. You know, have a nice day, and please landscape that 2 foot for us. We would like that. So we can certainly encourage it.
So there's no fence permit requirement at all?
There's no fence permit requirement to build a fence or a wall that meets the current code. Building and planning code.
I think you could, we'll look at the landscape, I think you could still require it and just make it part of a standard. Whether it's.
And in some cases, it doesn't happen or something, at least majority will do it. And I walked around, it made a huge difference.
Jim, what else do you got?
I mean, I think my big thing was just looking at the combination of the retaining wall and the side fence. Making sure that we were all aligned. I know that Margaret's not aligned with the by right stuff, but I think at some point we got to put some kind of line in the sand. I think staff did a great job with some of these setbacks from the retaining wall to the fence. Makes a huge difference. And we have a lot of tough conditions in Corte Madera where we have properties on top of each other with difference in grades. So I think that we can't address everything with these by right codes, but I think that we're doing the best we can. So.
Yeah, thank you. I think it does step in absolutely the right direction. Your draft regulations that are on page 6 with the type in blue that describes all of this stuff is absolutely appropriate. I would support those. I do not have any disagreement with anything other than what Jim brought up, which was the 50 feet along the side yard. I would agree with him, maybe a 35-foot point on the side yard would be appropriate for that. To Daniel's comment about frontage and address and front yard definition, you guys have some stuff in the code right now about that. Is there not something in there? And does not the address define, if it says 550 Tamalpais, then that front yard is on Tamalpais? Is that fair to say?
No. It's the for planning purposes, the definition of the front property line is the shortest one.
Got it.
And there's nothing wrong with putting your door on the other street and your mailbox on the other street. And as long, the main point of addressing is mainly for public safety. You can come and get to your house as quickly as possible. So that's why they logically try to make addresses.
Got it. Okay. So how do you guys feel about that? We didn't go beyond Daniel's comment about the definition of front yard being incorporated some way in here. Is that just a bridge too far for this portion of the? Oh, is that another subject for another time?
I think like it's a different subject. I addressing, I could see that the owner would want to have some sort of buffer from the main street. So I think we might get into more of a more detailed discussion on how that can be attained. Because I think that we would really be putting out a homeowner. I could just see homeowners on Tamalpais. You can already see they're already built up what they have. I mean, there could be a better way to do it, but I wouldn't want to limit them to buffering the sound and the noise. And in this discussion, I should say, maybe we can direct staff to look at that. That's my opinion. Your thoughts, Margaret?
No.
I mean, I've always thought that the more definition you put in something, the better. So if it explains something that might be a question here, then we ought to figure it out and put a definition in.
Well, you guys deal with front yard definitions for
Yeah.
all kinds of applications, and somebody submits something, it needs a, you know where the front yard's going and have to decide.
Mhm. Yeah.
And just a
Yeah.
quick, I think it's an interesting question. I think Tamalpais is pretty unique in this regard. We have other thoroughfares, for example, like Paradise Drive, you wouldn't want, or those subdivisions, for whatever reason, they put the rear yards up against, Paradise Drive. And so they do have 6-foot fences there. And so it's just a different condition. But I think the older parts of town and how they were designed, on Tamalpais in particular, where you have those corner lots. Yeah, I mean, I think I think there would be an exercise of just defining which streets where that really becomes sort of, you want to have more of an openness to those properties rather than ultimately one day closing them down. And I think it would only be on those corners.
Right.
That would be an issue. So, but
Maybe Magnolia.
yeah, it could be Magnolia, some of those corners there where the other streets tie in. Something to look at I think mostly on the west
Maybe
side.
it's not, maybe we come back later after staff had a chance to look at it.
And maybe it encompasses, I think, Commissioner Kenny, you've made comments, other design review issues for major thoroughfares, or not major, significant thoroughfares like Tamalpais. And so that could be another exercise. What design parameters do we want for this street and that street and this street, because they're special and they're unique part of the town.
Okay. Well, I don't have anything else to add, so I'm going to ask you guys if you have taken enough clear notes to come back with revised document for us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
All right. And I'm trusting nobody else put their hands up online, Tracy.
More hands.
All right. That's great. So, shall we close out this item? Anything else to say? All right. We're done. Business item. Thank you for that. Did somebody attend last week's town council meeting?
I did.
You did. Please tell us about it.
Well, I will, and you'll be very happy to know that one of the things that was one of the amendments to the Corte Madera Town Council Rules of Procedures, which will actually apply to all the commissions and meetings, is that you can now remove a disruptive person from a meeting, but it would require a warning first. So just remember that, Peter.
Our gun won't work. Okay.
Anyway, that was, and then in the open time for public comment, Patty Stoller gave a very complete update of things going on with age-friendly Corte Madera. On October 21st, the lion's share, and I didn't know this project, is when anybody age 60 or older can call up a number, and I have the number if anyone wants it, and get some help with small projects like changing light bulbs and fixing small things. That's their help. And we already passed October 7th, which was Ageism Awareness Day. So that's what she had to report. On the consent calendar, they talked about and went through the foodware ordinance for, I don't know, a second or third time, and described 3 tiers of requirements. The first would be that foodware had to be natural fiber products. The second, if you couldn't find a product that fit that requirement, this is for carryout food mostly, including Safeway deli kinds of things. it would have to be, the product would have to be BPI certified or another approved product. And then if there is nothing available, you could use plastic. And that ordinance would be effective on July 1st, 2024. And it would be enforced by code enforcement. And then, and perhaps Adam could give a bigger explanation than I have. I kind of got it because it was new to me and I didn't quite understand everything it entailed, but it's called the Front Porch Product, and it's run by Home Match. And what it does is an organization, I guess, an organization that matches people who they're calling home providers with home seekers. So you would invite, or you would go through this process that this organization provides, where they match up people who have extra space or extra rooms or want to have a roommate situation with home seekers, and anybody is eligible, but they've said that the average age of the provider is usually 71 and the home seeker is 52, although it could be a lot. Yeah, the seeker, they've had seekers of 18 years and up. And it can be rent, it can be a task exchange. They were basically asking, I guess a number of places in Marin County have either embraced this group, this organization. Is that what you would call it, Adam? An organization? And I think they're a nonprofit. And so in the end, and Mill Valley, I guess, really has embraced it. And I think Adam talked to Todd Cusumano about it. Anyway, at the end, the council voted $20,000 a year for 2 years as a sort of a contract to see if this works. And it does fit into the goals of the housing element by increasing the number of houses in the housing stock or people living. But I thought one of the most the best part of it was that it would increase the opportunity for a workplace living situation where people who work in the community would have a place to live in the community. I don't know, perhaps Adam could add more to it because it really was a lot to the whole thing.
Adam.
Yeah.
I'll
do really good. I think first up.
He did a good job
That
of
was
summarizing
interesting.
on both of them. But and Martha and I have been working with this group, or they've been attended some of the housing element meetings. But just real quickly, they provide direct marketing. It's a service they already provide, but it's essentially trying to match overhoused people who have extra room with good matches from a personality standpoint, or people who they take sort of the guesswork out of getting a roommate, put it that way. Or they try to provide the services to make sure that it's going to work out well. And they sort of, a lot of times it's maybe an elderly person who needs some services as well around the house or can help with that. And so they do that match. And then they also provide services over the term of the lease or what have you. So it's just a way to sort of keep some of the maybe people who might need a little bit of extra income in their homes while they bring in other people who may need who work locally or are looking for homes at a cheaper rate. And that can also sort of provide some social benefits there as well for the home provider and both, in fact, ideally. So that's all it is. And it's, it's sort of a fledgling organization that's trying to grow. And I shouldn't say fledgling, that sounds negative. It's more sort of growing organization that sort of is looking to try to expand upon this idea, which I thought was pretty creative in their efforts.
It didn't apply to ADU situations, though. this was
Yeah, it could.
something different, though.
Well, it certainly could. Yeah.
Oh, okay. They do have a legal part to it, though. They have a lease and they have helped the people figure out the details in the lease. It's not just a roommate on Craigslist. It's something that becomes illegal. And then if people aren't getting along, they have mediation services. And the details they were mentioning about what goes on were pretty fascinating.
All right,
And that was pretty much the meeting.
that summarizes it. Good, thank you. I was curious about the food thing, and that organization. So, two good bits of information. Does staff have anything they want to tell us about, particular or worth imparting?
I don't have a report tonight. Did you want to mention anything about tours?
Yeah. I did put out an email for site visits to town hall. So I heard back from a couple of you. One thing I've been advised is we can't have 3 commissioners on the same day. So I don't know. It worked so far, but I've only heard from Commissioner Chase and Rizzo, but tomorrow at 3:30, we're going to be doing a little site visit, I'll call it, /tour with RJ, and also the same one we're going to repeat on Thursday at 11 a.m. So if that's something that you'd like to do, let me know. And actually, since Commissioner Bushoyer is not here, yeah, either day. I think right now I have Peter on tomorrow and Jim on Thursday.
I'd love to do it, but I can't do it
Those
on a
times.
weekday during work hours.
Maybe we can find another time that works. That I know that's the case maybe for some other individuals as well. So, but yeah, at 30, 35, 40 minutes or something like that, bring appropriate attire. But yeah, and Dan, if you have one of those works for you, let me know. And
I'll let you know.
Okay, perfect.
That's great. I'm looking forward to that very much. So a lot of work has gone into it from Adam and staff on that thing. It's a lot.
Oktoberfest is coming up.
What?
Oktoberfest.
That's right. I was going to say that next Saturday is Oktoberfest. So you all are required to be there.
I'm certified to.
All right. That's great. I see you have some items for another meeting. Those hold true. They will stay on the agenda. That's great. Okay. With that said, then we have meetings for the 12th of September. Does anybody have any changes or move to approve?
Yeah, I do have a proposed amendment
Great.
on page 2, item 6, 204 Chapman Drive. The second paragraph, I'd like to suggest we add a sentence at the end saying the Planning Commission indicated that they're not supportive of setback variance. It just clarifies, I think, one of the most important thing that we said.
Good. Okay. Will you guys incorporate that? Then we could move to approve with that amendment to the notes. All right. Everybody on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Aye.
All right. All right. Thank you. So we're going to adjourn. Good night.